Well, here we are, 286. We thought maybe, if Infernal's doing some roster announcements, wouldn't it be nice if we could get the man, the myth, the legend himself, Seoul Infernal's GM, Roston. Hello, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yes. Thank you for coming on and giving us all the info.
We were kind of begged in the comments. Like, people just were like requesting, okay, can we get him on? Can we get him on? And then, yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense, right? Like,
only made sense, yeah.
It's also the perfect timing for everything. People just got done with reading it TwitLonger. Literally, because that's how long it was. So yeah, I think we've found a good time to talk.
It was a nice ode. I think you kind of hit the nail on the head at the very beginning. You're like, no, this isn't TwitLonger. This is TwitLongest. Like, I mean, I think everybody got like a nice hug, nice send off. It was wholesome.
Yeah, I'm surprised how many people read it in entirety. I was like, I figure like we have like so many like incredible like diehard fans that have supported us, like every year, and like I felt like I needed to really thank every player before we made the transition, and really it was like it's like a love letter to just like the fans and our players, and I think I think I was pretty happy with how it was received, and I think it was deserved by our players and our fans.
Oh, I think it was super like touching to see not only some of the tender isn't like the exact word, but it was very touching. It was very candid in some areas. I didn't get through the entire thing, but I saw that every single player that ever walked through those halls, got like a nice send off, and I think that's more than a lot of other, not to bring other teams into it, but I think that was special, and that was really cool. That was dope.
Thank you.
Sure. Did you forsake all your past decisions of picking up so many players that you had to go through?
I actually think we're like for an org, we've kind of committed. We've had a couple big rosters, but we've kind of had a lot of the same names come back and forth, and I think we've really when we pick up a player, we really believe in them, and I think you see us bring back more players than I think any other team. And I think it really is just like kind of our, I guess, belief since the beginning that like, we believed in you from the start, we give you a second chance, and really just witness the players' growth is something that I think is like super rewarding as a GM, is just see like, whether they leave for a year and come back, like they are different from their experiences. And I think every player to ever play with us or be on a roster with us has just been a big learning opportunity for myself and the coaches. And I think, most importantly, like I just wanted people to know that everything we've learned or gained from them through experience is something that is still held on in this org and will continue to be part of our growth moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's also like a little bit of the traditional esports DNA, right? Like where,
oh yeah,
realistically, like there's like a definitely like a ship of Theseus situation where it's like there's a certain transience to all esports teams, but I feel like fans of old esports structures understand that a lot of it is like the core people that make up an organization, or the values the organization purports. That's the beacon, like that's shining through everything. It's not necessarily like, okay, this is a Yiska take. I never cared about this the city. I understand that this is something, the Overwatch League fan in particular probably doesn't like to hear, but yeah, I think generally speaking, that's also what these gestures like your TwitLonger show me, right? Like it's that there is a continuity, right? And that there's a certain value code that I feel like still you're sort of like the heart of it, but that definitely permeates the organization in terms of what kind of players it associates with, and what kind of mantra is chanted in the practice room, if you want, right? So
Yeah.
yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. Just I think we're really like I guess I'm very fortunate that the players I've had to have like uh are kind of kept a good relationship with me too, and I think it's actually really funny. Like a couple, I think like a couple players and a coach. Sometimes I catch up with people and they're like, "You're really weird, Roston," and I'm like, "What?" And they're like, "It's been 3 years since I've been on your team, and why do you still catch up with me and say happy birthday every year?" And I'm like,
Oh,
"What?" Like, oh, I mean, like, why not? And they're like, "Oh,
yeah.
you're too kind for the internet," is something I think like Seda told me like recently, and he's like, I'm like, what does that even mean? Like, I think I think one thing I've like always done is like I really appreciate the hard work that
Mm,
the players and coaches put in. Like, I appreciate while it's happening. If it's not happening during the season, I like to really push them to make sure it happens. And then, um, though, just I'm very thankful for everyone that's worked with us, um, and I think that has kind of that relationship that I've got to keep with players and coaches has kind of become known in at least amongst players and staff in the league. So
mm.
I think for us, when we try to attract talent or coaches, I think they're often very willing to give us a chance and kind of like come on board because we have like a historically good track record of kind of taking care of staff and players.
I mean, it sounds like it, right? Like if you're reaching out 3 years removed from, necessarily working with these people and, fostering those connections, um, I think that that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? I think that's, a testament to, what you guys are doing over there. And I think that's special stuff. I don't know much about the goings on necessarily in the Overwatch League, but that's pretty special. That's something. Got
You
to
know,
give you that.
know what's else is special, Joe?
What?
The support that we receive. Segue.
Oh wow! That's unheard of. That's a special one. He's on his game today when he's thrown me the segue. So before we get into the Seoul Infernal, the roster, the coaching staff, what this offseason has been like from a GM's perspective, we have to thank the people who support the show, make it possible. So episode 286 is brought to you by Battlecrab, Refine Bean, Bronze Spot, Boo Picasso, Chris R34444, Kasha 67, Lolshin, Porkchop Sammy, Rexane, Unequaled King, and Volamel and Sugar High. And our YouTube members, I am DRW, Brother Adam L, Sagi Fumi, Ice M Jello, Fire Element 6, AK, and Chris R. Roston. The roster's been released. It's finally off the Google schedule of to do things. I can't imagine what that even looks like for you guys, especially, in APAC. How does it feel knowing that it's in the ether now? We can finally, I know that like every player, I think you mentioned on Twitter that like every player is getting their day, and you kind of like quote retweeted the official account, and like you're giving them all like gas, and everybody's like super excited. So what does it feel like for you?
I think I'm very excited. I think we
Hmm.
have overall, I think a theme that is very obvious is we have a lot of like uh, mechanical potential, and I
Sure.
think we have players that I think a lot of it's a very mixed bag on the reactions, to be honest, and I can understand that.
Hmm.
But I think ultimately uh, we have a small group that is very, I think will become very close quickly, and coaches who really believe in every single one of these players and will give a lot of time to each player to develop their kind of decision making, I
Hmm.
think. And I think I also think because of some of like the mixed bag and like reactions, I think these guys are really hungry, and I think
Okay.
I know we're gonna talk about each player at some point, so it's just overall, I just think very excited to see kind of the highs that this roster can take us to.
For sure. And I feel like it's interesting to see that you once again like counted on some. It's weird to say. For some of them, I don't quite have them pegged as veterans, but I think most
They
definitely
kind of
at
are,
this point,
right?
you have to
Yeah.
say they are, right? Like multiple seasons under their belts and have been in Overwatch League for a while. I would say also a bunch of those guys that you signed this year definitely still have something to prove, right? I think for skewed, always like in the shadow a little bit of in the flex support position behind Shu, I would say, unless it's a break meta, then like that quickly changes. Mag certainly still a player that we're still like trying to find the full potential that he was capable of or prophesized to have very early on. So yeah, I feel like this is an interesting roster. You said there were different receptions. Do you want to, should we directly go ahead and go like into the most public reaction we had of the roster announcement?
Yeah, let's go into it.
All right. Look, I think sometimes Twitter is an awful way to communicate. We've somehow been just like honeypotted into.
I don't even think it sometimes is the right word. It just is.
Like it is actually in some way we should probably rather communicate via Reddit. As crazy as it is to say, at least
it is preferable
have some space
of the two.
there to explain what you mean.
Yes.
Here it's prone for misinterpretation. I saw that, and I felt like I don't really have a team here. It's just like this is a perfect communicational like misunderstanding of what Twitter definitely facilitates. Is that true? So to sort of highlight or especially show to the audio listeners that maybe aren't looking at the video footage right now, it's of course the tweet that Reinforce made. And the tweet went.
Are you fanning the flames of drama? Are you drama baiting? Is this going on live stream fails?
Maybe we should start doing shorts. You know, that's what I'm saying. And now I pull out my headphone cord because so Johnny basically, if you haven't seen it, if you don't keep up with the drama of Twitter, like Johnny said, Infernal fans, are we getting a super team this year? And then Infernal, we have super team at home. That was in regards to the MAC announcement. A little bit of a weirder one to do it to that. Yeah. And then you had a reaction to that. And it was posted on the Reddits. Like, you know, we take every crumb of drama in this, I recognize. I feel like in the aftermath, it probably like got hashed out. I think. Did you talk to Johnny at all about this?
Yeah, I mean, like, honestly, I've known Johnny since the start of Overwatch League, and you know, he's a really nice guy. I mean, he's been to our Fusion house back in Burbank, and I had a lot of time to chat with him. And I guess you know, I didn't like the tweet at first, and I saw it, and I'll be honest, you know, I think I explained to him like, hey, I just don't like, you know, if it was a full roster video and then you do that. That's one thing, but I think it's like a individual player's announcement, and like it's like his day to like kind of feel special and like, you know, and feel like, you know, excited to, you know, excitement should be building. And I think that kind of just like yeah, I had like an initial reaction. I was like, hey, like, you know, I was like, dude, like, are you kidding me? Kind of reaction. And I think I feel like sometimes I am a bit sensitive because this org is like something that I, you know, care so much about. And I think that because our fans are also in the same boat as me where we care so much, that I think it's been really fun to poke fun at the Fusion and just the org in general. And I think it's like an easy joke that is kind of just overdone sometimes. So I feel like a quick joke like that for a little bit of ha-has and clout, I didn't like it. But I mean, Johnny's like honestly like such a nice guy, and everyone that's worked with him like knows that not only does he have like a lot of passion for Overwatch, but he's just like a really upstanding guy. So like we like right after like I tweeted that, and it was like my time. I like went to sleep, woke up, and I was like, whoa. Like, that's out of context. And then so him and I just messaged on DM, and like this guy, like he's like, oh, like, hey man, like didn't mean it that way. And I was like, dude, definitely not me neither. It's like not like we don't have rapport from before.
Sure.
So we just, you know, I wish I could tell you we hate each other. We're gonna like, you know, fight, and, like, you know, give some Twitter drama that, you know, Twitter world wants. But honestly, he's like, you know, great guy. He's like, oh, like I would love to have, you know, even like Mag or some of your players on to chat with them, and once you get like a translator, if you could bring him on. Like it was just like such a easy thing to just hash out like in DMs. So I think, no, I mean, I really appreciate like everything he does for Overwatch. So it's not like anything personal by any means.
So no like celebrity boxing in the interim of the first stage of the season. You and Johnny aren't like headlining a heavyweight bout.
Wait.
Going at it.
Roston, how tall are you?
Not tall enough. Johnny's reach would probably come out. He'd probably put his hand on my head, and I'm like swinging and can't even hit.
Yeah. No.
Yeah, I mean, as a big human,
I think that I met Johnny. I think 2019. I think in Krefeld. At Take TV. I think might have been. What was that? Was it Takeover? I don't remember, but I remember the thing that I remember is the angle my head had to take, which is not very often. I'm like 6'2". I had to look up pretty heavily. So no, I think it might have still been when he was on Rogue, like all the way back 2017 maybe. So he's a big boy. Like that's it's probably not within the weight class as well. We'd have to figure out some other competition.
It's a hot new thing. I don't know. Maybe Overwatch League. Check it out. That's all I'm saying. Maybe we get some chess in there. Anyways, Mag is kind of the first, player, that's kind of connected to this. So I feel like it's only natural to just jump into, what was that experience like? Was that like a trial process? We've talked to a couple, GMs and staff members of other teams in the past where, sometimes you can't necessarily just, have to lean on trial. Sometimes you just have to kind of pull the trigger on players that you are excited about and then you do want to kind of recruit. So what was the kind of recruitment process for Mag? What was that like?
So it was a trial process actually. Okay. So we did. Unfortunately, the trials happened like around the time when basically every NA team had already like thrown bags at like a lot of the free agents that were big names, and I think some of them still did want to trial. I mean, I think before the NetEase situation happened, I think a lot of big Korean free agents had kind of heard about the way our players were kind of taken care of last year, and then I think we were kind of like a very hot destination spot if we were indeed trying to put together a really like a super team. Obviously the NetEase situation happened, and we really didn't know if like there were so many rumors like, is there going to be an APAC this season? Are they all going to be in LA this season? Are they only going to have 3 teams and contenders this season? Like there were so many different things that were happening that there was like no way we can just commit and like compete with some of the NA teams, and the offers they said are it's now or we're moving to someone else kind of situation. So we did trial pretty much the best players that were available and willing to trial, and I think Mag definitely stood out to us. Obviously, he's a player with incredible potential, especially mechanically. I think this goes back to like our playoffs when we came to Korea with the top 4 during the COVID year. And I remember it was like I was sitting there, I think with like me and like Chris, like a few of us were sitting there and just watching Mag's POV like, yo, this guy next year, like let's try to get him. And like we did like kind of talk to him, but I think at that time Washington was big money bags. So it was like an absurd situation to buy out versus finding a veteran, already established veteran, mono for I think a much better value. And I think we were so excited about him back then, and I think for me it's a different coaching staff now, but I still remember sitting there with like a bunch of players and coaches sitting there just watching him play his Winston and be like, that is incredible. And I think for me personally, his time in the league so far hasn't necessarily showcased how good he truly can be. And I think And I think it's not a question of mechanics, it's a question of, kind of like team synergy and kind of like coaching overall. And I think I have more confidence in uh, our backline versus some of the last couple of years that Mag had to play with. And, nothing negative against them, but it's just, I do think that our coaches and backline will probably provide him a better scenario and situation to pop off.
No, most definitely. I think anybody who's even remotely familiar with contenders in the last, granted it's, a little bit farther removed than a couple, years, but it doesn't take much to find, a mag highlight reel from, his time on Runaway or, even some of I think the start of, last year for Washington. I was very excited to see mag kind of really step into his own a little bit, return to that playmaking style that I think he was kind of known for. Obviously didn't end up getting to that full potential, but you could see it still there. So this is definitely, was definitely an exciting prospect. I kind of always was like, all right, where Infernal's got some moves they can still make. Mag's still there. You put him in a new environment, like you said. Maybe we can still get Mag for a couple more years. He can step into maybe a new system, a new environment. Yeah. Really kind of step into his own and lead a team like we kind of thought he would. I think 2021, I think is. It was his rookie debut on Justice, and it was not necessarily what we expected. You could still see it if you looked hard enough. You could find like little moments like, dang, Mag's got the talent, but it just wasn't always necessarily super cohesive. Just because are you still kind of are we reserved when it comes to Mag? Or
I remember interviewing Mag during the time where he was still like starting, and I think. It was probably Junk at Queen stage is what I have in mind. And I felt like there his confidence was high. He was confident on the hero, and he was confident that he could like really make a difference in the game. And I think that's when he was like really scary. But I also realized that this feels like a player that definitely like it's all mental in terms of like what's the trajectory of the team? How does he feel about the picks that he has to play, right? And this is okay to keep it real. This is one of the aspects I think that you guys will have to master this year, because at least so far it looks like that's your starting guy. That's your one guy that you get right for all the tanks, and I think that's a trend across the league that a lot of teams are running right now. But yeah, I'm looking forward to that, unless, of course, there's another signing which you eventually have to take or make, and we'll eventually also talk about that. But yeah, in terms of Mag, I always felt like he's pretty flexible in a wide area. Like, for instance, his Doom was pretty good. It might have actually been Doom meta when I interviewed him.
Yeah, I remember that interview because of the headline specifically read, "I think I'm a great Doom."
Yeah. Yeah.
And like, to be fair, like, to Mag's credit, he's not just like of an aggressive tank player. He's not only flexible. I guess that's kind of the point I was leading to. Like, he actually weirdly is flexible for somebody who kind of transitioned into Overwatch 2 as, a primary main tank, what we assume or like project is, these more traditional main tank players. So for somebody who sits in a role accompanied by some of his peers that, are a little bit more centered around Winston or maybe like Rhine specialists, Mag has kind of built a career playing a vast majority of these heroes. And I don't think that really can be underlined enough for, Infernal fans who are, are looking to get excited and maybe are a little hesitant on Mag. I think there are some connective tissue that you can kind of look at this character and be like, okay, there are, some problems. It wasn't necessarily what, the experts and pundits kind of like pitched at us, but there is attributes to this player that do make him special. And it looks like, and I think Roston can kind of back this up as well. It feels like this system, this coaching staff, maybe even some of the players kind of all coalesce into something that Mag can really help lead, right? Like, obviously tank players in Overwatch 2 really setting the tempo. really setting the pace in a lot of these fights. I think that was a big criticism for me going all the way back to like I think 2020 or rather 2021 going into 2022. Was Mag's kind of hesitancy, his absence, and that felt kind of palpable. Obviously, fresh start with Infernal, new players, some of them rookies. Well, I guess not rookies. It's still so weird to kind of look at M3 and Zest and like, oh yeah, they're still so young. Like I got so much to learn. They're still green. It's like no, they did a whole year last year. Like they're not rookies anymore. And I'm personally, I'm very excited to see like how Mag and Zest kind of like synergized. That was always something that it felt was kind of lost for Mag. It was like that DPS follow up. There were very talented DPS players that he was playing alongside, but it wasn't necessarily super cohesive. So in that same kind of realm, is Mag somebody like is the team all together? Is that like,
so everyone got together. Oh, sorry, you meant like physically? No?
Yeah, physically. Is everybody in the office? Everybody okay.
Yeah. So we just reported end of last week, so just got everyone in, starting to build that rapport. And I think one thing about Mag being our only tank is like on a strategic standpoint for coaching, I think when you have a dedicated off tank and a dedicated main tank, the moment you put in your roster for that map, it's like very obvious to the other coach what they're going to play, and it just puts a lot of coaches in this weird situation where A, it's obvious they're going to counter us, B, if they're going to counter us, do we counter mind game them and counter them and bring out our off tank on a main tank or a main tank on an off tank, and then that just has so many situations to just look so bad. So I think the new model is really like some of those like hyper flex tank players like someone or Smurf for example, like where they really do cover a lot, and I think that's something that our coaches really value this year, and I think we're very excited for Mag because he is one of the more flexible and mechanical tanks in the league, and I think having a good system where he understands, when to be aggressive, when to peel, and like really when, to trust his supports and the DPS follow up. I think that will take him to that next level, the level that we really thought he was supposed to be when he entered the league.
No, it's kind of. I think he's in that kind of. He's in maybe an edge case, but I think he is kind of in that unicorn class of the those tank players that can play the field, like you said, be very flexible. Any last thoughts with Mag, Yiska?
It's interesting. I think your piece was about this, right? I just yeah. I do feel, once again, keeping it real, this is probably Mag's last chance to, really bring or, show that the potential that we all thought he had is also workable at the big leagues, right? I think of course, like whatever, like the justice situation, given that, like how that ended probably wasn't also the easiest to maneuver. Getting into the uprising definitely wasn't the easiest either. Getting into that roster, like also knowing like how many tanks there were, he was competing against that whole situation. Definitely not the easiest. Also, generally playing for Boston is a very different experience. I think like their practice schedule was always very, very intense. I feel like yes, but for the reasons that we talked about in the opening, in terms of the values that this team seems to have, it's like, okay, this is the new angle where I can legitimately see that this like if it doesn't work here, I'm not sure I'd be, if I was a GM after this, I'd be doubling down on Mac, or like, okay, for a team that has no aspirations, maybe for like a team that that wants to compete in the APAC region and whatnot. I think it's a fine signing, especially because of the upside. But yeah, like I think there's definitely like a top 5, top 3 tank in there. We just got to peel it out, right?
Yeah.
pushing.
100%. And I think you, Roston, you kind of underlined this team as a whole. As I'm going through some of these names, I'm like, no, that kind of fits. Like the hunger, the drive to kind of not necessarily prove people wrong, but to kind of like feel full, be within the Overwatch League and know that you are amongst, the world class, like Yiska had talked about with Skewed, kind of living in the shadow a little bit, being that third man when it came to, the flex support metas, obviously having his time in the spotlight, but then kind of, having to play second fiddle. Mag, obviously, like we're talking about, not necessarily living up to the expectation. When it comes to some of the players that have returned, I think that, at least for me, we've seen how good Zest is. We've seen, I think I will forever lament MN3 not getting enough praise for that Ashe performance. That he just taking over the game by himself. I think that is probably one of the hardest carry performances we've probably seen in the Overwatch League to date. Just in terms of the history, just an absolute monster performance. But when it comes to like FiXa, Zest, MN3, who are these guys like personally? Like we've seen them play, but like is Zest like this goofy kind of jokester type? Is MN3 like very stoic? Like who are the way that I always kind of post it like in like, candid talks with people is like who are they as like a part of a car? If we think of a team as like a vehicle, like who is MN3? Is he like driving? Is he like the vocal leader? Is he like the in-game leader? Like who are some of these players like personally?
That's funny. MN3 is the actual physical driver.
Okay.
So he's he one of the things with Offseason he wanted to do was get his driver's license, and
okay.
Just so that he really does like to kind of not always be in the same place, kind of like have a change of scenery. So he'll drive out with players and go somewhere sometimes, and that's like really nice to see. I think MN3 is very I think soft spoken. I think he's someone who I think he's very self-critical, and I think that's something that I really want him to kind of work on. I think it's like something that I saw. It's like something I think about like the great hit scans when they're younger. They expect their performance to always be at their flow state peak performance, and if they're out of that performance, they think that they've let the team down or let themselves down. And I think you can't always be at your 100 to 90 to 100% zone. Like I think operating and being able to kind of know when you're hot and not, and like just like be confident, not worry if today's not your day. Like you can still go out there and play confident. I think that's something that I definitely want him to work on this year. Last year he did have to split playtime with Carpe, and I think that was because during early scrims, like Carpe had a quicker understanding of the role that each character plays in each meta, because he's had so much experience and he understands team play, the pressure situations. And I think MN3 had such a great opportunity to learn, and like a great court like Brett Favre and bringing up Aaron Rodgers, like having to watch like someone behind. Like I think he has learned so much from that, and I think he's got to see like, oh, this is something I could do, this is what I shouldn't do, and then he has played the game. He's like just such a grinder. So I think for me, I think this is that leap where he takes some of those highs, those super high highs, and kind of brings them more consistently. And I think when that happens, like he's truly a special player. Like I think, I think he could really be like the best like flick scan player the game has ever seen.
Oh, I mean, without a doubt, after last year, like if that wasn't evident last year that he could be, again, the potential is there. And if he's, sitting behind Carpe and, you're observing that he is kind of like adapting and maybe molding some of the, more mental side of the things where, he isn't super hard on himself and he can kind of like ease into, just accepting where he is today and, just being okay with that, but still having like this crazy mechanical skill. Like MN3 on his growth arc, like that's a scary guy. That's a monster.
I have this. Okay, please tell me if I'm bullshitting, because I have this simulacrum, like this specter of like small little things that I picked up on last season. Also, like I think I interviewed him once, and I think also just looking at the gameplay, I feel like the big split between MN3 and Carpe was specifically Sojourn, and I have this thing bookmarked in my mind about MN3 where he probably there was something that I remember where he really wasn't that high on how the tracking mechanism of Sojourn played out, right? And that seemed to be like this thing that really messed with his confidence, and that caused like you guys to have a little bit of a back and forth on Sojourn with Carpe as well. I feel like this guy, for the lack of a better word, has like straight up Pine DNA when it comes to flick hitscan, right? Like that's the bloodline of like it started with Taimu, I guess, then it was Pine. That like I think like it's probably harder to see that even Ants wasn't that. The like crass like 360 no scope flick clicks. So it's like now this also why he's an exciting player. But it felt like this. It was like this one mechanic that his mental almost like bent around a little bit, and he had to come to terms with. So I guess my question is like, does he like Sojourn now?
It's like it's definitely there's a lot of truth in that, but I actually think the Sojourn metas that we had were a little actually different when they were played. Like there was one where the Sojourn kind of like has to make decisions to flank and play on the side, and like a very team coordinated style where when you dive in, like you have to like split off to the side and get your like really make a decision on what position you need to be in. And then there's another meta where Sojourn kind of hangs with the team and hangs back with backline, and it's like more of a poke meta where it's like building up the railgun and then shooting, like right clicking someone in the head. And like I think that is where he was stronger than Carpe. And I think I actually think he obviously he is very much a flick scan god, but I think I don't actually think that it was necessarily as big of a problem as you might think, like the actual primary fire. I think it was just more of a difference in like the actual Sojourn play style of that meta, actually.
So moving, like, I think the way that you kind of describe it kind of brings me back to like the Junker Queen, like Jotes meta, as the Western fans kind of like took the reins and ran with it with the naming conventions there a little bit, like kind of playing in these trenches, and then having somebody like MN3 just kind of having to like rely on those right clicks to kind of, like you said, kind of poke out some headshots, get those team fight wins early. Obviously, like very strategic at where you position, super impactful there. But maybe on those earlier Sojourn metas where you kind of had to make maybe individual plays away from the team, that was where there was a hang up, it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that he has a tendency to potentially overheat, maybe. I think.
Okay.
Yeah, like I think he really, like when he's he gets that first kill. Like I think I mean, I love that. Like I would love to see a player overheat than shy away from taking those risky shots. And I think there's a lot of players who like hold on to the rail gun until they know that like, oh, this is a good situation. Like even a body shot is high value in this situation, but he'll take like any shot. And I think his hero damage done per 10 minutes was like very high for a Sojourn as well. And I think having the more he played last year, like the later, a big trend for him was that he would kind of see and emulate what Carpe does, then kind of stumble a little bit in the beginning when he first got stage time. And then by the time our tournament came around, he looked very, very good. And I think that trend of kind of giving him more time and dedicated play time to grow and feel comfortable in the role is something that we really are excited for this year. And I think that, like I think we had a lot of late runs in playoffs that we looked much better than we did early in the stage. And I think that was like a big theme last year. And I think if we get him to that tournament stage level sooner, and I think he will look very much more consistent and much better in the stage.
Are you guys at all concerned about like in my mind? Okay, this is very clearly like a hard hit scan god. Then again, like Overwatch's meta is a harsh mistress sometimes, and like specifically, like I think, for instance, especially like let's say there's a Genji Tracer meta. That's you probably want to clone Zest for that one. What happens then? Like, have you guys put MN3 on like a grind schedule, or see? This is my leading question where I'm trying to probe out where the sixth man could come in, and then everyone can fill in the puzzle, right? So, what about MN3 on all those off picks?
Like, I mean, I think the big question mark and worry for me is actually that character named Sombra. I think it's kind of been a since Hisu left the team, honestly, like it has been a very hard role to fill for us here. And I'm always hoping it's not a Sombra meta. And I think but I do think that there have been times where MN3 has played a very high level tracer and even Sombra in contenders before, and I think definitely there have been times where he has struggled with those characters in contenders before as well. But I think really it's like not a with those characters it's not like really a mechanical question. Like I think on a mechanical level he can do what needs to be done. I think it is very much a cooldown decision making like
Sure.
yeah like cooldown character, and I think that is something where I really do trust and challenge my coaches to like really instill better decision making and confidence really in the decision making for those characters. And I think as just a raw piece of potential, like I don't think he's has any like shortcomings in those ways, and I think just need a little more time and understanding and individual like coaching for those characters.
That makes sense. A lot of trust there. Placing, because again, I think Yiska kind of hits it. I think that's a pretty fair point, right? Like those metas do kind of pop up every once in a while where it's like, okay, we do need this like off tracer pick, God forbid, it's like an echo tracer or like a Pharah tracer. It's like, okay, Zest, we know where Zest is going. Now where does MN3 kind of fit into the picture? Is he, does he still kind of bring that umph? And it sounds like you guys, trust him. It's maybe not necessarily up to like the same degree that the FiXa, the Widows, the Ashe, some of the Sojourn can be, but it sounds like you guys trust him to at least, bring something to the table that, isn't going to like hinder the team. It's something you guys trust.
Yeah, and I think I think we do trust that, and I think what I would worry more about is a double hit scan meta, because
okay, yeah,
I think that's something
fair.
where we've been prepared for a lot of seasons for that to happen, and I think it hasn't really happened. So I think I think I would worry more about that than a meta where like I don't necessarily consider like too many of the rosters, especially in APAC, to be like super deep in hero pools for the DPS, and I think I think that I'm just overall confident that even if say there's this thing that's just a really really terrible meta for one of our DPS, that we would find a creative counter or something where like we have such a strong performance on a certain character that we can even find success in countering their playstyle with something unique. And I think really though their hero pools are by no means small at all, and I think we've had a couple of moments where MN3 even like for a last point on like some maps, like he'd have to actually hop onto like Genji, and like if you watch it, it's like he's not Zest, but it's actually like pretty
Better than
good
you
too.
expect.
Like
Okay, yeah.
like so I think one thing about our players that I think we've already said before is potential, but I think really grinding the game. They're really hardworking, and they're really, I think, stressing, keeping your, your aces strong, but also like kind of becoming a jack of all trades, and really knowing how to flex into anything. And then with that meta comes out, then we can fine tune that and make you into some sort of a king. And then, and I think, you know, I think that's definitely something that I am trusting our players to continue to work hard at. And then really, you know, I'm challenging my coaches this year. Like, I think this is, it's definitely something that I expect them to develop. You know, when you have a much smaller roster than you know ever before in Overwatch history, like I think, and you keep the same number of coaches, I expect that the individual attention to each player, their growth, their mental management should be much higher.
I think it's only to be expected, right? Smaller class sizes in school, you get some hands-on education, get some help there.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it makes sense.
There was one thing in there that you mentioned that I think have to request clarity on, because I think like the way I see those other teams, they are pretty flexible. So you said like you don't consider a lot of the APAC DPS lines to be super flexible. Is honestly like, okay, I feel like that's probably not true for Spark. It's not true for Dallas. I think you could say that probably about Charge in other than Choice One. I think Choice One can probably also play just about anything. Then we don't know what Dragons will look like. Okay, I realize now we are getting into a territory where I'm trying to get leaks from you.
Yeah,
but I mean,
Fisherman Yiska.
Dynasty as profit. That's an interesting statement, right? Like, how do you? I think like I'm probably overinterpreting this a little bit, but what did you mean like by you felt like there isn't as much flexibility?
No, actually, I guess the rosters aren't as deep, maybe, and I think,
Right.
and I think, no, actually, I mean, the teams you brought up, those are, very flexible pieces for sure, and I think, like someone like Leave can really play everything, and I think that team is like super. I think that's super exciting, to be honest, and I think, having Dallas here is obviously, maybe not the best news for APAC. They are a pretty good team. I think they did pretty well last year. I think at some point.
Yeah, I think they had a pretty good season.
Yeah, so I think I think we really just trust these two. I mean, I think these are people who we've seen how much they've grown in just 1 year, and like we're gonna see how much they can grow in another year. And yeah, I think. Yeah, I think that right now we feel very comfortable with them covering everything they need to cover. And obviously there could be a meta that comes up where, we scratch our heads and wonder like, how do we tackle this problem? But I just think that when it comes to the DPS performance in APAC, I really think that we, even with some of these incredible teams, I think, incredible names, I do think that next year our DPS line still stands up, and they are still going to be, extremely good in comparison to the rest of the DPS in APAC.
Sure. I mean, yeah, 100%. I mean, even with some of those names that we, just get kind of listed off with, Dallas and maybe even, some of Dynasty, the one Dynasty player that we know thus far. I think MN3 is us not only just hold their own, but, showed that they can compete. And I think that in some facets, yeah, no, I would say so. I would say this feels like a very confident upgrade in a lot of positions when it comes to filling out the pieces around the two of them. And I think, Infernal as a whole probably are better off for it, right? Like I think there were certain times where I did look at Zest and I'm like, dude, he's just kind of like running over this game. Like he's dragging this team across the line. He's doing the thing. Pass the ball to Zest. Just get him the ball, and he will just eliminate you on Genji. Obviously, that's kind of the pick that I think a lot of people associate with him. But MN3 is no slouch in that regard. We've seen what Bag can do. Skewed has been a fantastic player. I'm going to be completely honest, right? I'm going to just out myself. I've never been huge on FiXa, but again, in the proper situation, in the proper environment, I'm willing to give. If Roston's willing to give all these players all kinds of second chances, I'm gonna clean slate for me, FiXa. I'm ready to, be shocked. When it comes to FiXa, who is he personally? That's been somebody that I think, I think in general, a lot of the Western fans don't get a ton of like insight into the Korean players, but like who is FiXa for the team?
Like was the youngest player of our team last year.
Okay.
And he was like, actually, if the season had started as initially planned, he wouldn't have been eligible to start the season, which would have been weird. So,
Sure.
but that news came out, and we're like, oh, we don't have to sign a 30-day. Like, that's like really lucky. So, I think he's someone who's, like if anyone's actually like really like seen his aim and mechanics, I think that's like always been like his major plus side. And I think a lot of main supports, like traditionally, like before Overwatch League, main supports literally, I mean, not all of them, but many of them didn't have like any mechanics. They just sat there and
they
just,
sat on the cart.
yeah, they just sat there and pressed either,
Yep.
boost or heal, and then they just had very good shot calling, ult tracking, and beat timing. And I think as like this year, we're expecting the next couple characters that will be in the league to be supports. And I think when the day when a main support character needs aim, I think that's like I think that's the first time I think we really see FiXa like actually like gapping other main supports.
Okay.
And I'm like hoping, like I think main supports deserve a character that has like a very high mechanical upside, and I think with 2 more characters coming out, I imagine that one of them will be. And I think he I wrote about it a little bit in TwitLonger, but he's like was really nervous to start the beginning of the season, and I think he's someone that nerves didn't actually. It's interesting because like some of the most nervous games he had wasn't necessarily his bad games, but overall, I think when you're the youngest player in the team and you have like older guys telling you like, oh, you should play like this, and then you have coaches saying, no, you should play like this, and I think in his head, I think it wasn't like always clear or obvious to do what also he thought was best,
Sure.
And I think when you kind of don't have that confidence, like I've seen a lot of main supports that are actually really good like struggle massively in situations where they're just not confident. I think that is one of those positions where you need to beat with confidence. If you're second guessing for half a second,
Oh, you're missed.
do
Yeah.
I beat here or not? You might Ajax like right there, and I think that is something where I would say that for sure. I'll agree with fans that like last year, I think particularly some of like the big ult usage timing wasn't wasn't great. But I think overall, when you look at his performance on uh, flexing to honor or something, or flex support like BAP in such a short amount of practice time he had, like he did look so much better. And like some people joke like his flex support's better than his main support, but we have a main support where some people are saying a flex support where some people are joking saying his main support is better than his flex support, and I think that is kind of exactly where we wanted to be, and I think it's with 2 new supports. I really think we don't know what will be asked of players, and I think players that are able to pick up other support characters that they haven't been known for their whole career and perform at a good level in the Overwatch League, I think that speaks volumes. And I think, of course, like the way the team plays as a whole and like the ult usage, I think those are things that I would say is more of something that needs to be coached better, and a better like maybe a standard for like how the team plays together, and a standard for when we decide to use certain ults against certain ults or counter it. I think those things need to be fleshed out more and be kind of put into confidence. And I think that those issues kind of go away. But as far as like a mechanical and flexible mindset for our 2 supports, it's like I think it's kind of crazy because if you have like a Lucio Brig meta, I think we should be in a very good situation. And I think if we have a double flex support situation, I also think we're in a very good situation. And I think flexibility for support is just really something that I think a lot of a lot of coaches and GMs will think it will be very important for the next season.
Oh, for sure. I think that there's been a few years. I think we've kind of ruminated on this on the show for a little bit. That the support we've seen a very rigid change, obviously, with Overwatch 2 moving to a single tank. But with supports, it feels like there is this slow creeping move that the subcategories that we typically define as main support and flex supports are kind of homogenizing. They're not necessarily very strict lines. Those boundaries are not necessarily holding up these days. And yeah, and it's kind of funny that you pointed out they do complement each other in very surprising ways that I didn't clock at first. Yiska, is that something that you kind of picked up on, or?
Yeah, I think like here's my thing, right? Like in my mind, we started this roster talk with like a giant block of marble, and we've tried to chisel away at like who's the sixth player? Okay, so Mac is very flexible, and then the DPS are very flexible, and now FiXa is very flexible. Like, where's the attack vector for us, Joe? Where can we find the sixth player in the block that's already there? And
I don't know what kind of clue hunt game you're going on, but you could just ask him. You could just ask Roston, hey, Roston, do you have a sixth member? If you had assigned a sixth member, who might, what role might they play?
Yeah, we don't. We really, and honestly, we don't have a sixth player yet, and I think we have ideas for what holes we might have, but I think we really, we're just starting scrims today, and I think we don't really know what holes we really have, and I think a big part of a lot of the mentality of the players we brought in is that we want to show them that we trust them.
Sure.
And we want to show them that, like, there isn't some, replacement for your one bad, you have one bad match or a bad day, a week of scrims, and next guy in. Like, I think we really kind of want to give them that room to feel comfortable to grow and really feel comfortable to, take risks and, not play scared. And I think that is kind of, I think, an approach we're going to keep. I think, I talk so much with Code. We like, it's kind of like one of those things that we really kind of argue a bit about, and like kind of like go back and forth a lot about, like, what do we do with that sixth slot? And I think for us, I think it's kind of like a wait and see approach, and kind of see what we need, if we really need something, if we don't need something. And I imagine that position could potentially be a fluid position where, say, we need someone for a couple stages, then we will sign them for a couple stages, and then if we need someone for a different stage, like kind of a maybe not a season-long piece is kind of how we might approach that role. Then again, we also looked at a lot of the, there are some good talent still in free agency, but adding another player doesn't necessarily mean you're like adding like incredible amount of value. And I think also, I think one of the hardest things ever for Overwatch history is really how do you keep your non-starting or non-playing players sharp? How do you continue to improve them if they're not getting actual stage time? How do you when quality scrim time can be scarce, like, do you really want to like give up maps when you could be giving it to your starting roster? Those are all questions that every team has been asking and struggling with over the history, and I think that's something where we are also like really thinking about as we make that decision.
Yeah, I feel like we're now no longer in a position, like, for instance, famously, like Dallas used to run like in-houses and whatnot with coaches that were capable of picking up the slack there, or like the specifically like for I guess for Dallas it was the support positions with Rascal and Aid that were able to take that on and then just mirror the situation there. So there are some interesting ways to deal with the situation, but I will say that it's, of course, like there has been a lot of creativity. One of them is recreating Fusion Union, have them play in Europe. You know, others is to, of course, like that's a little unfair because you definitely did that because of a unique situation. But we also talked to Askoft about this, and he was also pretty much on the page of like, I would just want 5 guys, and there's a certain quality about like knowing I will start and I will get the chance, and like this is something I personally have to deal with. I can't just fall back on someone else, right? So that's also just an economic reality of this league. I don't think anyone really is there a deep roster left. I don't think so, right? Like nobody ever
super deep.
Like I don't think there will be like 10-man rosters
Nah.
this year. So yeah, it's a reality that we had to face. It's also interesting in terms of the bounce back potential. I think in prior years, what the easy solution, of course, was to just switch your starter, and then like a career might be buried here. The loop around, improve, and then improvement is not linear. Sometimes they have breakthrough moments, and suddenly it looks like, oh wait, like someone looked pretty bad, honestly, like early in this year, and then came around. Like honestly, like I think it's a little underappreciated, but I almost feel like that's the story of Dallas, like for the first half of the year, right? Like they weren't championship caliber for a decent amount of the season. And
yeah, at the start of it for sure. Yeah.
Right. And as the meta falls into the lab and they also like figure some stuff out, they get footing and then probably become the best team in the world in the second half of the season, right? So I'm pretty sympathetic to these different economic realities. I also don't think the value that we're losing is just all bad in terms of like the ability to just have someone else pick up or have the hero pool. I also was pretty surprised to see generally across the league how the flexibility of some of the starters, even across history, sort of like artificially hidden from us. Like, I feel like nobody, like we kind of had to learn that Smurf was this hyperflex tank once he like stepped out of a team with Super, and then he could shine there. So I think there's a lot of hidden potential for a lot of these players. I think we've also filtered over the years for just highly adaptable kinds of folks, where we now have selected for guys that can't be one tricks anymore. It's not a feasible thing to be in Overwatch. I think the last remaining position, if there's any, is ball, and it's a well, like there's definitely like a weak point for a lot of the starting main tanks where they just don't have a good one.
Sure, of course.
I think
a weird skill set to grind
for sure. Like, and then others are probably not as represented. We could talk about Sigma and whatnot, but yeah, I think like if there's something to be said about like one trick potential, it's probably mostly given in the tank role. But yeah, like I think it's just a adaptability point. The one thing that I'm a little bit hesitant on is I'm trying to be cognizant of the sort of like saying, okay, this guy's like very good mechanically and everything else can be taught. Probably can't to the fullest extent, right? Like there's like whatever there is in that player, the talent to be very mechanical, I think it's almost like an underappreciation of, for instance, someone like a skill set like Zest, who just like locks into the matrix of how a game is played. Someone like Proper, who understands the entire thing. Like that's almost impossible to teach, right? Like that's a skill in itself. Like whatever you think is going on in that hand-eye coordination in the brain that works, that same talent is not something they just picked up from someone telling them and reading a book, right? That in itself is a skill set that's probably very hard to reciprocate. It's just such a human thing to say, well, the hardware is the like click on head thing, and then the software is just like whatever we tell you. It's probably not that easy, right?
Yeah, and I think those players are just overall rare, and I think in some metas it's easier for some players to like how I like describe like Zest and like those special players. I think like Alarm is the same way, and like where I feel like they see the game from top down, even though they get their own POV, but they can see in their head, they like really just, without knowing exactly where everyone is, just actually kind of know where everyone is in the map at the same time. And I think like, you know, like incredible point guards in NBA have like that same
Yes.
ability where they just have this vision, and it almost like at a certain point of honing that vision, you almost feel like you could see the future a little bit. And I think, uh, you know, that's just special. I think those players, there aren't a lot of those players in the league though. Uh, and I think for us, like our I think where we have to improve, I think, is like coaching can create situations where you know what to look for. And I think uh, I really just think that some of the shortcomings of the players we have right now were really due to just a situation and like maybe the team play that wasn't there. And uh, I think the roster we have right now really unlocks kind of really using Zest, using MN3. Like there are very different types of players, and I think in every way we have to kind of adapt how the other pieces work together with them. And I think those players, the other players added, have a higher ceiling, I think, potential than we did kind of last year. And I think if we performed pretty well last year, by the time our players kind of wrap their head around like how the meta is and their job and role in the meta, then I think we did perform very well. And I think that is something that I expect to be even better this year. So I guess that's kind of why I'm like so optimistic and very, you know, just like really trusting that their mechanics will actually lead to that better performance.
Yeah, I think to Yiska's point as well, it feels like, you know, if I'm gonna hone in on FiXa for a moment, not to critique as hard as maybe I do in the mid season, but if there is this, you know, mechanically gifted player who, you know, maybe you just need to reel in when it comes to, you know, resource management or the positions that they take, you know, whatever kind of macro concept you want to kind of throw at him. I feel like that's much more easily taught than just like go grind out Lucio aim trainers or go XYZ. You know, I feel like if, and uh, I think Roston's kind of correct in saying that, like, obviously he's correct. He's the GM of the fucking team. You know, that he does have the talent. It's just, you know, upping that level of, you know, in-game sense to kind of grind out that eagle eye-esque, you know, point guard, you know, top-down view that you kind of mentioned, to be able to see kind of the flow of the game, where people are kind of predictive in that way. I feel like not necessarily getting to the predictive level is something that you can probably grind out. I think we'd probably all agree with that, but getting, you know, maybe helping him to see the game a little bit more clear, to kind of widen that POV out a little bit. I think that's something that you could not easily teach, but I think that's definitely doable across the season as a whole. I think that's agreeable, right?
Yeah, I think like the thing that I don't want to like overstate here, because for instance, one area where I definitely feel like that's true that coaching can do a lot is like when I talk to the Toronto guys. And like those guys were all on a team. They separate for a year. Everyone has different coaching experience. They come back together, and they're like, well, in terms of like how the game works, we feel like the shot guys have the best understanding of us, right? And that's down to 9K's coaching, and like of course like one of the, if not the best coach of all time, Krusty. So I feel like there's definitely something there where coaching can unlock certain ways to think about the game. I think basically like the way this is maybe also like a WoW esports take, but if I feel like there is something to be said about the ability to process a ton of information at the same time and make the correct prediction. That's something that feels very much inherent to the player, and something that's really hard to teach. It's probably related to something like working memory that seems highly genetic and whatnot. But there is something to be said about like fine-tuning the software on which this CPU runs on, right?
100%.
Teaching the things and the ways to see the game that helps that hardware kick into gear, right? And I think that's definitely very fair to say that that's all coachable. There's also something to be said about maybe you don't even need to necessarily coach the knowledge. You just gotta give him a chill pill and like teach him some mentality things, and in order to remain calm and access the abilities that a player has that otherwise are locked away behind, stage fright and all those aspects, right? So yeah, definitely, like I think there's something there. My aversion is just to say like, oh yeah, like it's almost like very often in Overwatch history we had like this, I can fix him, right? Like
I think that's esports, but that is esports as a whole.
Yeah, and I feel like that's very often also doomed to fail, but especially when you have like a coaching situation that's very different than maybe the coaching staff or the type of coaching staff that was there for players in the past. That's a worthwhile approach to take, right? Just to see if the completely other angle works, right? I think it's fair to say that like being coached by Lori is very different from being coached by 9K, is very different from being coached by Ascoft, right? Like they're very different mentalities at play, and you gotta figure it out on the server. That's the only truth, right, that you will get in this game is like, are you getting wins?
Yeah. Hate to be super results driven, but yeah, that is the closest thing to truth that we're gonna get in this game. Yeah. That's for sure. I know we've kind of like danced around the coaching staff as a whole, but I'd love to kind of get your thoughts, Roston, on, who the Infernal, obviously we know who the Infernal coaching staff is, but like, who are they really? Like, obviously we've had some coaches on in the past, and we've definitely like teased out this idea that, even at the GM position, it's like, the titles don't necessarily, they're not like fitted caps, right? Like they're very loose. You're doing extra things. The definition of a head coach for one team is maybe different from another team. So starting with Jin for a moment, like who kind of like, is he more strategically oriented? Does he more delegate to Char and Sungmin? Is he, a emotional kind of like almost, I don't know if it's offensive to say, maybe like a father figure to the guys to kind of like rally them together, an emotional leader? Like who is Jin to start with?
Yeah, I think he is more of like that emotional leader, someone who I think it's interesting because there's like, I would say there's like, I don't know, like systems coaches and like players coaches and like,
Sure.
and
Also.
I think he is more of like a player coach, and I think this is like, there are a lot of very successful Overwatch League coaches who are those players coaches who they just really kind of inspire very good thought process and conversation. And I think one thing that I think is incredible at Jin is that he's a very good listener to the players. He really does take extra time to talk to each player one-on-one a lot and hear each week like, oh, what is good, what is, what are you stressed about, what are you working on, and really kind of just find a way to really bring the most out of them for their potential. And I think that is, I've worked with a lot of head coaches already.
Sure.
This is actually the first year I've actually kept a head coach, and I've got to work, with 9K, KDG. I've worked with Chris, Moby. I've worked with, we had a Hayes and Hui before, and I think every coach has been so different in their approach with players, and I think for me this year, and the way last season went, I saw a group of guys that really after losing maybe one of like the best players on our team to kind of just having a bunch of players starting out the year with kind of unsure about the expectations, and watching every one of these pieces really love each other in the locker room, to grow together, to bounce back from a tough loss and like not be dejected or unmotivated in the next week of scrims. I just felt overall the emotional leadership and the direction of the team was always very strong. And I think that's something that I really liked. And I think I had not, really seen someone like that before that I worked with. So I think when the season ended, I talked with him for a while, and I think coaching wasn't perfect last year. There were a lot of things that I didn't like as well. But I think the pros were something that I really wanted to work with, and I think the cons are something that I knew we had ways to fix.
Sure.
So, and I think no, I think I do have a lot of high expectations for this coaching staff. I think they will have a lot of pressure this year from me personally. I think in so many of my seasons when I have a new head coach, I have to watch them first. I have to see
Sure.
how do they do it naturally. What is their style? What do they like to do? And then maybe a third of the year, and I have like that big chance. I liked this that you did. I didn't like this that you did.
Mm.
Here's something that a past coach of us did that I think you can benefit a lot by adding to your game. Here's something that I think you're doing too much of, and maybe you should do less of that and give that to someone else. Like there's like these things that I've given so much feedback to coaches in the past, and um, this year, we have they are very confident, and then I let them have a large majority. And every year, you have to set your coaches up for success, and I think they had a huge say in picking the players we got, and I think they are confident that they will be very competitive.
Is okay? You say there are certain things that you saw that you think are fixable. Is there one thing that you could share? Like, is there any particular like approach that you think like you already implemented, or are easy fixes that you pointed out?
Yeah, I think we were. I think our coaches were all. It's like their first time as a Overwatch League coaching trio, and I think a lot of times they were maybe a little too nice with each other. I think they were more worried about like making sure that if two of the guys agree that that's right, then maybe I'm the one that's wrong. I'm not going to really
Mm.
fight my case, and I think it takes energy to really argue your point. And I think sometimes like I think one of like the most legendary coaching staff ever is like that shock trio of
Yes.
Junkbuck, 9K, and Krusty. And I think when I talked to 9K a lot and I learned like what they were like, I just know that those three were like inseparable. So like it literally like after the scrim is done, they go and then like have a beer together and they're just like, what the hell was that today? Like what is this? And they really just sit there and like they really just talk so much together. And I think that
Mm.
is like the ideal way to be close with three coaches with three different mindsets and perspectives, because then you feel comfortable kind of like arguing the point you have. And even if the two guys disagree with you, it's like you feel like, oh, but I really think this and listen to me and like I want to explain why. And then even if you're not right at the end of the day, that helps the other coaches think, oh,
Sure.
that
Yeah.
could be a pitfall in what we're thinking. Oh, that's part of that is true. And I think even though our coaches really got along well last year, I don't think they had that level of like discussion or argument. And I think one thing that I challenged, Jin as the head coach to do is make sure he picks people that to work with that he can really do that. And I think after a year, before they got back together, they had like crazy one-on-ones with each other and like really just said like, no, this we really failed each other in this way and that way. And I think both Sungmin and Char have so much to offer from a strategic coaching standpoint, from both as a team and on an individual level. And I
Mm.
think those two guys really didn't get to tap into their full potential. I think it was often like Jin and Sungmin agreed with an idea, and then Chara felt like, oh well, then
I
I
guess
guess
we're gonna
my
go.
idea doesn't
Yeah.
matter,
Yeah.
and I think the same way where Jin and Chara had experience before, like, oh, we already know how to do this, and then someone's like, well, you don't want to listen to me. So um, I think, those are definitely things that they improved on, and I expect that improvement to lead to better, I think, better strategy. I think
Mm.
I don't think we were necessarily always fast to understand the meta or how to play in the meta. And I think those are things that I know are there because I've seen it in some metas where they're good and I've seen the discussions. And when they do it,
Sure.
it's great, but they need to have a little more, I guess, responsibility to each other to push each other to be stronger. And I'm going to be, I promise them I'm going to be a little more ruthless with them. And if I don't like what I'm seeing early, I'm not gonna, let them like last year was let them learn let them make their own mistakes so they learn it from themselves. But if I see them making a mistake that they made last year, then I would be very quick to remind them about the promise they've made to each other and the org and the players.
Getting on a boxing match after all, Joe.
The coaching stuff, but hey, listen, this is definitely something that I'm very excited for, and like I'm jazzed that you're being so candid about this, Roston. Is like this year feels like an absolute like cracked like coaching lineup for like anybody who's like fascinated by coaching. Like this is, I don't know that coaching in Overwatch has ever been like this crazy stacked. Like Ray's coming back, Christopher's like doing a crazy, amazing thing over in London. Rush is going to APAC. We don't know what Moon's doing. Like it's super, super exciting. But what it kind of sounds like with what happened, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Roston. It didn't sound like there was necessarily always a ton of like healthy conflict, right? Like, and this is something that Yiska has definitely been like super, vocal about, is that like conflict isn't necessarily bad. It's just, when it gets toxic and, maybe, there's some ad hominems, name calling. It's about like constructive, conflict and addressing things. And it sounds like that's something that really is going to be pivotal for, the success of the Infernal in 2023, is like getting everybody's points at least heard, like you said, to inform or maybe even not necessarily always convince, but to inform like, okay, this is how you're seeing the game. I hear that. We can kind of play with that on the table and kind of think through it together. It sounds like a success. It sounds for a recipe success because it fosters a lot of growth, right? As long as everything can be constructive, there's nothing left off the table. Just because, you're in the minority doesn't mean that you're wrong, right? Like you have that open space to kind of, like you said, vocalize your case, argue your case, and at least let that be heard for a little bit. So it sounds like you at least have a game plan, and at least, with what you're comfortable talking about, at least have a game plan moving into 2023, which is exciting. I'm jazzed.
I'm excited as well.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of mentioned, obviously scrims are starting today. Is it crispy there? Is it cold in Korea? I feel like it's got to be kind of cold.
Just started warming up this week, actually.
Oh, okay.
I mean, warming up. I don't know Celsius. I'm American, unfortunately. But it's like a good 50 degrees. It's
Not
it was below freezing from like hovering around like 20 to 30 for the last couple months. So this week's been really great, and I'm from LA, so like 50-degree weather used to mean I have a jacket, and now I'm just going out and feeling like, oh, this is great. It's crazy how our bodies just adapt so quickly to the weather.
It is. I'm of a very similar mindset. It's nice like fall weather, it feels like. But you talk about like heating up a little bit, and we kind of teased this, earlier on. Obviously, Dallas making their way to South Korea. We've seen what the Spark's been cooking. They've been in the kitchen. They got a pretty exciting roster. So where does in the Infernal staff kind of sit as a whole? How do you kind of feel about the level of APAC? Are you guys excited to kind of like really test what this roster can do against some of these legendary players in some sense? Is it like, oh man, like Dallas is coming, like it's getting a little rough out here, it's a little yikes, like how do you guys feel at the moment?
Well, I think having a team like Dallas here is obviously as an opponent, they're a tough opponent, so getting wins at the end of the day is the goal. But as a scrim partner and someone that we could practice against, I think having them here is really great. I think what I've heard from a lot of the coaches in America last year, and that certain metas, or a lot of metas, Fuel just really kind of had a standard for how they're supposed to play in that meta very early. And I think credit due to Rush. I think Rush is, one of the true, one of the greatest coaches in Overwatch right now. And I think having a team like that here means that we can kind of become stronger from each other very much faster. I think last year APAC didn't have that many, I would say, like strong coaching. I think it was like a theme where it felt like we were a little slower to come to like a standard meta in APAC versus in NA, and I think it is kind of just due to like less teams, less ability to book, high quality scrims. I think, so I think viewership wise, I think Fuel does have a lot of fans here in Korea as well, and I think um, having them here will inevitably make us stronger. And I think the goal for every team is to make a deep run in the international competition. So I think, even within the APAC, if it makes us harder to secure that top two, that is one thing. But I think at the end of the day, if you're not a top two in APAC, then you're definitely not supposed to be in the international. I think that is every team's goal should be to be able to compete at the international stage.
I mean, you kind of, talk about the scrim culture and obviously how fast that kind of progresses and in region. Obviously, APAC has had like a litany of, crazy strong amateur talent, O2, whether it be an academy team, vice versa. There's always been incredibly strong scrim partners there. And it doesn't seem like, at least at the beginning of this, like the off season, it was like, oh, APAC's looking a little rough. We don't know what's going on. It's difficult to kind of like project how good APAC's going to be. But now with like the sudden development that like, the defending champions are returning, or I guess not returning, but like going to Korea, and then looking at how strong Spark can be on paper, are you necessarily, does your expectations of the level of APAC, has that kind of like grown since the start of the season, where it's like, okay, like we do have like really, really strong scrim partners? Is this something that you guys are looking forward to, like increasing your growth? Is that like exciting? I don't know.
Yeah, I think there are some, there are like a lot of NA teams where like those rosters are like, had a lot of previous success, and um, also some of them, with players that were always good but are also just as hungry to succeed.
Mm.
And I think some of those rosters on paper look, you know, very scary, And I think for us in APAC, I was worried like, oh, is it going to be like a huge difference? And I think just because the overall number of players in the league has kind of uh, gone down a bit, there's still so much talent available still, and I think especially at like the DPS position, there are like so many good players that can still perform very admirable in a lot of metas. Uh, I think APAC, is, I would say, we're to start the year or in general, I think maybe not going to be as deep or strong as some of the NA rosters, but um, I think overall, I think that to me, APAC quality feels stronger this year than last year, and I think really it just kind of depends on, I think, uh, really want to see what like the coaches in NA and how we kind of react to like, I think Rush is, again, like incredible coach, so I want to see like kind of like is that coaching a big gap, or is um, you know are the rest of the coaches able to kind of perform and keep up? And um, I think, before Dallas was announced, I think our definite goal, and something I think we expected, was to be a top two
Sure.
team in APAC, and I think now that's a little more of a question mark. But I think some exciting things will come out of Seoul and Shanghai. I guess we're Seoul too, so Dynasty in Shanghai. Um, and then I think overall, just because there's a less amount of players, the quality of players is higher overall on average in the league, and I think that the APAC will have a lot to say in when it comes to like the actual internationals.
Okay. I think what definitely happened is considering like there's less room on each team. I think definitely like the overall level has risen. I'm a little concerned because so much quality talent, like freaking Alpha Yi is now on Washington Justice, right? Like that's always the move that exemplifies like what kind of talent has been siphoned off of APAC. At the same time, yeah, like with the introduction of Dallas, I think that's exciting. I think what Spark is cooking up is definitely like I feel like that those and then you guys, those are definitely teams that can compete. Once again, we haven't seen the rest, so that will be interesting to see where that goes. But yeah, I think generally speaking, I'd like to push a little bit back on the statement that it feels like this that region is feels stronger. I think that's probably also even something that the Lord of APAC himself, Avril, would. I'm not sure. Like I don't want to put words in his mouth. I'm just aware how much talent was siphoned off. Like the Shanghai guys exploded, right? That's basically probably the biggest thing, right? That Shanghai. I mean, you gotta give Moon some credit, but at the same time, this is a generational team that just departed and was mostly siphoned off by NA, right? Like that in itself is a pretty big shift.
Yeah, I'm happy to see them, some of them out of our division actually, but like,
I'm tired of playing you guys. Jesus,
Lip, please. Go to NA.
Terrorize somebody else.
No, I mean it's just like it's an unfortunate thing with the offseason. Like again, we talked about it earlier, but like I don't think that would necessarily happen if like the situation with NetEase and APAC's uncertainty ever happened. Like it was just so weird. Like player says, "Hey, I want to come back to your team. I want to play here. Similar, same pay as before. I'm happy with that to come back. I want to win with you guys." And then there's like, "Oh, but American team just offered me more and they said they don't have time. Like, can you please sign us?" And we're like, Blizzard hasn't told us anything. We don't know what's like, to be honest, Blizzard doesn't know everything. And like, it'd be the worst thing to sign player and then be like, "Oh, APAC might not happen. And we're going to try to trade you now or send you off now." And I think it was really unlucky. And I think that did siphon off some of like the big, I think some of like the biggest names did get siphoned off. And I think we kind of I think APAC did end up having to pick with what was left and available. But I think it was just surprising because there was still a good amount of talent left and available. And I think that's why I think, APAC is, on paper and overall, like budget-wise for rosters, like there is a huge discrepancy in like how much our teams are, that we ended up. It's not like we didn't want to spend, but it's like at the end you pay players, for their perceived and market value. And I think, it like NA has like some ridiculous rosters. Like some of them are like crazy, and yeah, of course, I just sometimes when you have those types of rosters, they become very difficult to manage and coach, especially given the expectations. So that's something that I think we really have to like keep an eye out for.
I think like a big question mark or a potential upside of the APAC market is, of course, like the introduction of the Contenders teams, right? And like, okay, newsflash, I believe in evolution. Don't know about you, Joe. I don't want to presume, but the thing that makes it exciting for me is the natural selection that happens at the Contenders level that then filters up. Like the only the most ferocious Contenders team is going to meet you guys in these brackets, and that theoretically, even though it does feel like that arguably has never been less free potential, and maybe you can disagree with that, considering you have been recruiting in the scene for several years now, but it feels like the talent pool feels fairly drained, but maybe that's also just not knowing enough about what's happening there. Like, do you think there's a serious factor where, like, it's not just that the teams in APAC, fair enough, they have been siphoned off some quality, but whatever is happening Contenders, that maybe there's some interesting stuff happening there that could push APAC further than we presume at this point?
Yeah, I think there were like a couple of years that was very hard for contenders. I think it definitely made it difficult for a lot of orgs to want to invest or for players to really grind out and really try to compete to their best level. And I think the change is, I think, very good for that path to pro and attracting those top talents to be able to compete against actual Overwatch League talent. And I think we'll see a lot of new names and a lot of new talent kind of develop starting from here on, and new names that we didn't expect to be so good will start performing very well. And I think definitely a little bit of an advantage for APAC is that it feels like some of those top players that have traditionally come from the APAC region, like especially like a lot of these rookie Korean players. I think APAC teams are a little more mobile to kind of be able to quickly sign and bring them on board in case they are truly great talent. I think overall, I always just wonder, like, what if those teams are really good, like one of them, and they actually take Overwatch League? Like, that's just I'm very just interested to see. I think right now a lot of those teams are still kind of in that rebuild process because a lot of the the Overwatch League offseason happened. A lot of these players have shifted around, so we do have to kind of see what happens. But I think I'm just really excited to see a lot of these young players. I think will be highly motivating to be able to compete against Overwatch League, and I think that the age of the minimum age has kind of been lowered, and I think it is a lot more incentives for someone who's very talented at gaming to really devote themselves to contenders and try to like make their way to Overwatch League.
The kind of beauty of the the partnered, I guess if you want to call it, league in APAC right now, it feels like there's a lot of, hopefully, there's a lot of longevity, right? I think this esport, not at an increased rate, or it doesn't stand anywhere different from like a StarCraft 2 or a League of Legends. Because there was definitely like those homegrown names, those franchise, not franchise, but like those teams that really kind of paved the way for a lot of what we view of those esports. That kind of like were very important in the early history of those games. And it feels like for the future of APAC, it's very exciting because there is a possibility that with the the ability to have a contenders team that can compete in the Overwatch League, and again win it all. Like there is a possibility, albeit with what Yiska's saying, and Roston, you kind of support this as well. Like yes, there is a lot of talent that has gone on an exodus. But if there's anything we know about South Korea, is they produce some of the best gamers in the world, bar none. It doesn't matter the game, right? Even in Valorant, Stacks is crazy. So there's no doubt, but I guess the idea or the fun thought is that maybe some of the names and the familiar orgs and some of the brands that maybe we lost in the transition into the Overwatch League, maybe they come back. Is that something that you guys think is on the table? Like like an Element Mystic, or maybe Flarvin and Runner want to kick back up Runaway again. If there's a possibility that you could get in the Overwatch, at least maybe even sponsor an Overwatch League, a Contenders team that's playing in the Overwatch League. Is there kind of, is that on the table? Do you guys think? And maybe not necessarily for this season, but if this is super successful and there is a lot of engagement with it, is that something that's on the table for maybe next year?
Yeah, I think it really I think a lot of obviously this team's kind of dropping out was due to the economy and ecosystem of the league, and I think it's I think all those teams were built on passion, but ultimately they need to be able to continue to run their business. And I think when you start with passion, ultimately, like all of those owners, including ourselves with our T1 team, like we care more about our player having a future and going to a team that they want to go to versus let me get the highest dollar amount possible. Like I think, and it's kind of really, at least for us, it's always been super important to work with our contenders players and kind of like interview them in the season and see like, oh, like, what are the strengths and weaknesses you have, what do you want to be told about you as a player if other GMs ask, and then what are the teams you want to go to. I think there was one off season where for Who Are You had like went before his rookie debut, like there was like a huge buyout that was going to come from Dallas, I believe, and then there was a smaller buyout coming from NYXL, but Who Are You really wanted to play with NYXL, and we had this long discussion, and we were like trying to figure out a way to make it work, but it ended up, we just, we did have to send, Who Are You over to the team he wanted to go to, because ultimately you care about these young men and you want them to go to a team they want. And I think what became hard was when some team says, we really like your player, but we don't have a budget for buyout, or we only have this much money. That's it. And then you're like, oh, well, that doesn't even recoup the amount of housing, meals, and everything we've kind of put into the org. And then I think as that ecosystem kind of hopefully corrects itself, and I think we find ways to, buyouts don't have to be ridiculously high to make the value. I think when there's potential to win prize as well and get a lot more visibility into your young contenders players through this league change. I think that that change can happen, and teams can come back, including T1 potentially in the future as well. But it's just for this this season, it just didn't make sense for us. So I think I would love to see Runaway, Element Mystic, and some of those teams come back. I think it would be like incredible for the league and the path to pro.
Sure, yeah. No, like I think that's probably like the bull case for all of this. There's also a certain level of excitement in me where I think, to be fair, the baseline assumption for me right now is there is gatekeeping in terms of like who is getting into Overwatch League at the lower level, but mostly for economic reasons. So what I mean is there's probably Korean players right now in the space that should probably start ahead of some of the NA talent, but because there's prohibitive costs involved with housing, with visas and whatnot, that's the gatekeeper. In prior years, I felt like the gatekeeper was the GM not recruiting optimally. I think we've solved for that mostly.
Pretty
well.
I
think there's nobody really egregious outside of the confines of Overwatch League teams. So knowing all of this, if actually like the Contenders was able to produce a team that would be competitive with Overwatch League teams, that would be largely exciting. It would almost be like someone there must just know something that we don't know yet in the pro realm. That could come from a coach. Maybe there's a group of players, right? Like we've not had this inefficiency in the market for a long time, and that potential is hugely exciting to me. Also on the NA side with the Pro Am, even though I will say that, of course, I think I expect upsets much more, considering some teams just don't take it as seriously. If we're being honest, like the scrims just started up full throttle pretty much this week for most teams in the NA region. So that communicates a certain seriousness to me, even though a lot of them say like we're just eager to compete now, and I think we got some time left. To be fair, I think they'll eventually get there. But yeah, like the potential of us just having missed something completely, and then they show up, right? That's interesting.
Yeah.
And then, I don't know, I guess this is a question for you, Roston. How do you think the market will react to that? Because in my mind, it was always like, okay, so if we actually get a Contenders team in such a system, if the Contenders team ever makes it to a tournament, let's say mid-season, some miraculous thing happens, are they just getting recruited right away after that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's exactly what, like, I mean, if you look at what Vancouver Titans first season, like they just pretty much picked, you know, the majority of an entire roster that was successful in contenders here. And I think that just to have for an org, it's just such a win-win. It feels like, obviously that didn't necessarily end in a win-win, but overall to get into the league, if you could stay, have a group of young guys that really made their case for being a very solid roster as a group together, and then have the opportunity where an org says, hey, we want to take you guys as a whole together. We want you to play with another star player that we have already here. Would you guys be interested? Like, I think that is such a way for orgs to kind of be able to invest in a squad that they know is a bit of a cohesive unit that cares about each other and has had success before, and also have players that get to play together and take that leap into potentially the next level altogether. And I think those are very exciting things for every potential contenders, owner or future owner, that they just think that if they build something great, it will be noticed right away, and it can be, negotiated right away to kind of have them bought in as a group.
For sure, yeah. I think one thing, look, like this partnership thing, partnership if you want to call it that this was happening, the way it now rolled out, had been in the ether for a while. I almost felt like when you guys like let go of the T1 team, in my mind I was like, okay, this is like, now my confidence just increased that this is actually happening, because certainly there's a conflict of interest situation here. Not just like, you guys eventually playing your academy team in like a bracket, for instance, but also like, honestly having the double dip on scouting, and like it's, I won't say like information dissemination of scrims and whatnot is perfectly sterile in the Overwatch League. I think there's always some leakage, some spillage of what someone else is doing, even if it's just like anonymized data of like, a very good team is currently running this comp, let's also try it, or like X coach told me this. I think there's some of that going on, but yeah, it was that the primary decision behind the T1 situation, or what was basically going on?
Yeah, it just felt like it would be a lot weirder to have a team that, I think there's a lot of pros and cons to having that team. I think an obvious pro is that we never played each other, and they were great scrim partners for us for like warm-ups or something, or trying something out, or someone if we needed a scrim at a certain time. And I think they served very helpful in that sense. But I think as this new model is shown, I think a lot of Overwatch League teams will be super hesitant to ever scrim against T1 especially if they're scrimming, if they have a match with Infernal soon. Like, I think because of that, it's just it's going to be harder for them. And then B, I think, imagine if they are performing as they always have been in a top 3, top 2 team in contenders. They would be in that qualifier bracket. Then out of nowhere, so we don't scrim each other, we scrim each other, we don't have that warm-up partner. Oh, their coach says, no, we actually, like, every coach has to be confident about their own team, so he's like, no, we do have a shot here, so we don't want to scrim you, we don't want to give you any information, we don't want to like give you practice in the way you want, like. And out of nowhere, it kind of feels like you're not on the same team despite being in the same org. And I think at least for this year, with the way the schedule was, it just didn't really seem like we had enough of the pros to really really justify having that. And I think we'll see how it goes this year. I mean, we have a couple case studies out here, and we can watch how it works out for them. And then, if in the future we feel like it's valuable, we can bring it back. But I think for now, the org's 100% focus is on Infernal doing the best they can. And I think the decision was just made to really focus solely on our performance and doing the best we can here. And I think I can definitely understand, the motivations behind why we did that.
No, makes perfect sense. And I think, Yiska, you touched on something a little bit earlier that was exciting, because I know that you've always been like a big grassroots fan, right? Like that's something that you really enjoyed about, I'll speak for you for a little bit. Like the early days of Overwatch esports, maybe even the early days of esports in general, right? Like that idea that an open bracket, you don't know what's going to happen. You might have some educated guess, you might have a good idea, but just the stakes of knowing that there is that any given Sunday, attribute to a bracket, to a tournament. APAC has that. It feels like that's going to draw a lot of eyes. That's going to draw a ton of attention, and with that attention, obviously, the $1 million question in esports is how do we convert that attention into dollar bills? But I think that's the start, right? That's the impetus to a lot of growth. And I feel like APAC is going to see just an immense amount of growth. I can hear the fans cheering and finding the new fan favorite, like underdog story of the Meta Athena, the Runaways. They it's a family. They fund the team through streaming, and they just got a team house. Look at this washer. Like there's so many just like fun. It feels like almost a return in a light way, right? Like in a kind of diet way to what we kind of got hooked on originally with OGN and Apex, and maybe in some of the Western tournaments where you can just build those stories. Is it likely? We'll have to see. It's doesn't strike me as super likely to happen. Obviously, there's only 2 slots. You have 2 incredible teams. Obviously, Infernal is among them, right? You have Dallas, you've got Spark. We still don't know what Dynasty are doing. We really don't know what Shanghai's up to. It's a race for not too many slots, not too many seats at the table. But just the idea of, yeah, but what if? What if they do it? What happens? I think that's like must-watch TV, no? Like that's incredible. You have to watch APAC. If you're not watching APAC, you don't like Overwatch. I'm gonna say that right now. YouTube comments. You don't like Overwatch if you don't support tier 2. How about that?
Here's the thing. I think that's true. There's a big potential for APAC to bring that back, but it almost for me, and that I'll just fire that statement if you want to jump on that, Roston. If not, be free to stoneface this one. But I feel like all the potential here is in actually being more regularly in one physical location, creating like
Not wrong.
The fortunate case is that a lot is happening in terms of esports is happening in Seoul. That makes it so that content is much more possible. I think, for instance, one of the coolest pieces of content that came out of last season was you meeting up with the Dynasty and having that little turn heads thing. Like there was some super cool moments there. Like that's the type of content that could be facilitated here. I hope that there's also an initiative to bring that type of content translation into the Western space. That I think that would largely resonate with the audience, even though the start times are really rough for them to watch. But that's easy content to consume after the fact, right? Like you don't necessarily have to follow the games live in order to enjoy that. And a lot of, for me, stands and falls with the ability to just be in a physical location. It would be super dope for me, for instance, if the Contenders cinema situation there, or whatever theater or whatever it is there, would translate to Overwatch League, and just see like your players sit in the stands on days they are not playing and just observing, right? Like just like maybe they're holding like a couple of cards up or whatever, like cheering on friends they have in other teams, or I don't know, maybe there's some shit talk to be had. I don't know, right? Like there's something that I don't even think the Blizzard Arena delivered necessarily to that extent, where it felt like OGN's studio could feel like a living room for players as well, where they were very often in the audience, and there was just a great potential for content there. And I hope we're maximizing for that, because I'm pretty sure like Dallas is probably going to be in the area. You guys with your two teams are in the area, right? Like whatever happens to the other teams, not informed on what's going on there, but theoretically there's a lot of potential in making content, and I think that's the attack vector for APAC as an entertainment product, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the biggest feedback I did give the league was that the Blizzard team here in Korea and WDG as the partner really did like an incredible job at both the content they produce and the live match we had against Seoul Dynasty at the end of the year. Like that theater is dedicated to esports, and they have a stage there, and like they really get Korean players and the Korean culture, where I think the content they produce felt way more natural for Korean players to finally show their personality. I think it's really hard to do, and I think a lot of Korean players in a very Korean dominant league haven't had their brands really built because it's hard, and they're shy, and English is not their first language. And I think um, that piece is so funny, and I know that like I've heard from so many like of the NA players as well. They're like, "That's not fair. How come they get to do something like that and we don't?" And I'm just like, "You guys went to Hawaii, like come
Right.
on." So this upcoming year, I think with Dallas being in Seoul, and then Dynasty Infernal being here already, I think Blizzard is really talking to teams and really trying to get as many offline matches as possible. And I think that as an experience and the content that we can create is such a great to have another like hub for players, multiple teams and players to be able to meet locally is like such a good thing for like the fan base locally, as well as the players, really, as a reward. Like it's you want to be in front of that crowd, you want that pressure, you want to hear that. And I think that's what the beauty of the OGN Apex days was, that there was a incredible fan base out here that they're cheering and screaming loud for the players. And I think that Seoul Dynasty versus Fusion match last year was really just a preview. And not only did they have like a really, I think the signups, I think it was only within like an hour where or a couple hours where there were way too many signups. So it had to be like some sort of like lottery system, because it was like the demand was way bigger than the supply of tickets for that match. It was like a crazy gap where we wish the theater was 2 or 3 times bigger. But for us to have those matches regularly and for fans to experience that, and even after the match, we had like a very special experience for fans to be able to interact with the players, and seeing so many signs that are like, you're in the crowd and you see that sign that's like, this is for you as a player. Like, oh, Zess, feel better with your arm. It's like the day he heard it, and fans already have a get better, drawing on it. And I think that is what made that sport, that scene so successful. And I think that is something we're definitely, I think Blizzard Korea is definitely tapping into, and I think it'll be very exciting for this next season.
This needs to
operative
happen, right?
word there. Yes, it like even hearing Roston talk about it, hearing you kind of postulate the idea, like I just want to go like I want to go like I gotta brush up. I gotta brush up on Contenders, because I feel like I'm gonna be watching way more APAC than I am NA. I'm not gonna lie. Like I like that is must watch TV. Like that's the reason why, I don't know, that's the reason why I got into this. That's the reason why this is even here. Is like the idea that like, yes, they're live at the event. There's that plucky underdog team. Like the narrative's already kind of like there are skeletons there that you can kind of just mold teams, and not mold teams into, but that will fit the mold, right? Like they'll find their own, you know, narrative, but it's so like similar to some other teams, and it's just it's the best. I don't know.
Yeah.
I just want it now. I'm just like, even every episode where we have somebody on, I'm just like that much more excited to get the season started. But like,
Yeah. I,
it's so good.
I think what's really what would have been so interesting is like, you know how like Goats meta started in Contenders and was like big in Contenders before.
Yeah.
Like I just imagine like what happens if there is some super innovative team, Contenders team that's willing to just
Yes.
not
Yes.
fit the mold, play certain
Yes.
weird things, and come in, and then you have to see an Overwatch League team when everything they've been practicing has pretty much never played that, and I
Mhm.
don't know, or have to adapt on the fly. Like I think that is like when we get one of those teams coming in hot, where they like, and you have to watch them compete against like teams that have kind of like been middle of the pack, or maybe struggling in the current Overwatch League meta.
Sure.
Like, how does that shape the match, and how exciting would it be to watch that run of a Contenders team go as deep as they can? And I totally agree with you. I think it's going to be super exciting for viewers this year, and I think
Mm.
it also puts a lot of pressure on the Overwatch League teams too.
Sure.
And I think it's good pressure that should be added. Like, you've invested so much, and like, are you even putting out the best product you can? And I think and I think overall it's you love to see like a real underdog, a real team, just like a ragtag bunch that maybe had no expectations to come out and really fight against the seasoned veterans, or like the established names.
Yeah, and I feel like also this is the year where we need to relearn storytelling, not just generally, but adapted to the region that they're taking place in. But I feel like a big one is there's one aspect where, and I'll eventually have something on this, but where we've taught players very early on to be very scared about sharing their opinion, and now nobody really talks about anything. And the other thing is we have 60% Korean players in the league, and this league has never really figured out how to tell their stories with the richness that we already had it as a blueprint during the Apex era, right? And I feel like that's the bull case here to say theoretically, just logistically, all of that aspect could be there. You could teach yourself as a league to make content there that you can then also adapt. You don't have to copy paste. If whatever you're doing in APAC works, you don't have to copy paste that and just give that to an A fans. You can adapt it and fit it to the mold. But you got to tell these stories, right? Like we're not competing for attention of just like people wanting to feel the niche of competition in their life. We're competing against everything. Competing against TikTok,
Yes.
we're competing against YouTube, right? And that doesn't work without personality. Like there are only so many nerds that can look at spreadsheets and stats. There are only so many nerds that like can team hop like I do in terms of like who they like, because oh my god, they are living the excellence and whatnot. No, there is something about being sticky in the stories that you tell and in the epic moments. And even me, like 2-3 times a year, I will rewatch these Apex intros, for instance, that were just outstanding, and also feel that like that's it's not that it's strictly better. It's very different and adds a certain meaning to the experience there. That I'm sorry, but if someone tells me this is just nostalgia, it's not, right? Like there is definitely a different quality about the way this was handled back then, a familiarity that still felt really highly competitive and everyone really wanted to win. That can work at the same time. We just got to bottle it up, right? And give to the fans, and I think they will eventually also like it. We just got to grasp this, because after, like, if we not doing it, like, why not, right? Like, then just whatever, right? But this is like a big opportunity, and while it's of course not optimal what happened in APAC this year, I think hopefully that is sort of like the aspect where like the business case can be found. And then there's other stuff in terms of viewership incentives that could really bring the ball home. I think that there's a way to get a lot of eyeballs on this product. Then, like they're almost like acting like like a feature. People will watch this if there's viewership incentives in terms of skins. If the product is cool, then and something they can attach to, then they stay, and then they convert into fans. That, like, once again, I don't think fandom like the Runaway guys or whatever were really ever recreated in that sense in Overwatch in any team ever again, right? Like, it's just a different level. I think for many, Bumper is a mythological creature. And we gotta get there again, right? Like, you can have the very westernized, like sports league approach and the stats comparisons and the analysis and like the bragging, and like I love what Toronto is doing in terms of their content, being a little bit edgy, like pushing boundaries, sharing scrim codes. Like, okay, it was accidental, but as long as you talk to the other team, if that's okay, whatever, right? Like, that's okay. Just being a little bit edgy, pushing some boundaries, you will eventually just find out what the line is, and then you push back from that. But yeah, I feel like we got to figure out how to do content this year.
100%.
Yep. I feel like it's a topic that we always harp on every year, but this year feels like the match for the esports winter for Overwatch is if we can get content right with the fertile soil that feels like is so rich in APAC at the moment, with how exciting that format could be, with the established teams in NA and what these two products could be. I think there's a big, you want to talk about attack vectors. I think there's a very successful vector that both products, and if I'm envisioning these two like entities as separated, because I think I think you're kind of arguing that they should be as well, and I would agree. We can really stabilize is maybe the word, right? We can really kind of lay the groundwork. We can kind of, I know that the NetEase thing is definitely shaking things up. Obviously, the esports winter, the overall consolidating that a lot of teams have been having to do, it is scary, but there is a lot of hope, I think, for Overwatch for the future. Maybe that's just my own fandom. That's my own, hopium huffing that I'm doing, but it does feel real. It does feel like this is the year that you can really knock it out of the park. And it's, it's up to the league at this point. Without going too long in the tooth, because I know, you guys have scrims.
Go ahead. I gotta ask one more question, because when we talk about mythological creatures, there's one name that we got to bring up in terms of like how that went, right? Yep. I think like this is almost like I feel like a lot of stories, the biggest story for me coming to an end is not that you guys left Philly. It's that Carpe in-house, but switched games, right? And departed. And I'm interested to find out how that went about, because I think like his contract was probably up this year. Decisions had to be made. I'm sure you guys negotiate contracts while the season's going on. Maybe something like, did he come to you guys, said like, I want to try something else, or like what was the process like for Carpe to basically like make that decision?
Yeah, it was a lot of like the two of us talking a lot, and I think it's for someone like Carpe who really loves Overwatch. Honestly, like I think ultimately like staying in Overwatch was something that he, has done for so many years of his life. It's where he's built his career, and I think for him there were so many options for him next. Like he is such a smart and hardworking person that he could definitely be a coach. He's when he streams, and he has so many people watching his stream at all times. But at the same time, this guy is a competitive freak of nature. He loves to compete, and I think that drive is something like, where did he want to compete next was always on his mind, and I think the T1 team, has teammates with Saya Player and Munchkin, who are both ex Overwatch guys, and he's always, since the beginning, I think when Valorant first came out, I think it was during that COVID break, in that the COVID season, where there was like a delay in all the matches because we couldn't travel anymore. So there was like this weird 2 week where I think every Overwatch League player was trying out Valorant, and I think like Carpe was very good. So when it makes sense. I mean, his skill set matches Valorant, and I think over the years Carpe became so smart about the decisions he makes. Like a lot of players can read a situation like a number. It's like, oh, I can get that kill, but it's a little greedy. There's a 80% chance it goes well, 20% chance, but we're already winning. If I peel back, like it's not even worth risking that 20%. Like there's like little calculations in your head that is super, super like obvious in a tactical FPS, where it's like certain engages and situations, like you just don't take that fight even though you're better. It's just not worth it. And I think his skill set and mindset translates perfectly to Valorant. And I think and for us within the org, he's a culture guy. I mean, this guy is, he's competitive. He works really hard. He hates losing, and I think those guys are never, sometimes can be stressful in a locker room if you're losing a lot, but they're never a negative if your goal is to win.
Sure.
And I think one thing that I think when we talked about is, like, for me, I kind of really liked that we worked together for our entire career together, and I think he really left me with like saying, like, focus on MN3. Like, when I see him play well, it's no one's ever played. No one ever in the game has ever played the way he plays in some of our matches and scrims. Like, and he said that he's really special, and I think like he feels comfortable, like kind of like handing that torch off to MN3, and to see if without the pressure of one of the greatest of all time kind of like looming over him, what he can do when he has that full time and that full trust of the team.
Sure.
Oh,
Yeah.
Kind of special.
When did you know this was going to be the transition for Carpe?
Like, it's actually dude, it's actually crazy. It's before Zest got injured, actually.
Ooh, okay.
So we were actually about to potentially figure out a way where, because Valorant had a roster lock deadline that was before our playoffs. So we had to go to talk to our commissioner, their commissioner, and see, like, this is a very unique situation where our player just got injured and you won't start. Your roster locks now, but the VCT lock-in was just just the last couple weeks. So I was like, is there some way we could work around, like, neither league says that they can, a pro player could be a player in two leagues at the same time, but we had, Zest get injured, and we really needed, Carpe to step in and really, like, kind of just be there, for the team and do everything he can, and at the time to really give it his black. And I think that was like a really beautiful, even though we did terribly, I would say that his leadership and like kind of like the mentality of the team, like and all the, like, there were a lot of rumors going around already. So like I think it was like, yeah, I don't know how exactly like the rumors spread, but like by the time we got to America, like some teammates had heard, like, wait, are you going to Valorant? And like kind of was like a little bit of negative at first. And then I think Carpe had like a heart to heart with the team. He's like, guys, like, it is true, but you guys know where my heart is with this team. And he's like, I want 100% for us to do the best. And like he has never wavered in that passion for Overwatch and our team and us being the best. And he's still, like, I still talk to him all the time. He's like, hey, how's it going? Like, and we bounce ideas off each other still. And he's like always trying to support us and be like the best, a teammate he can. He's just a couple floors away from us every day practicing. So he's always part of the family. and I think we're just so excited to keep him in our family and see him on his next step. And when that when all that's said and done, you never know if he comes back in a in a role of leadership or something with the team.
Sure.
I mean, the way that you're kind of spelling it out, I feel like there is an open door, right? It sounds like there is, God forbid if he ever, decided to come back, maybe there's a seat at the table, right? It seems like the familial aspect of this team is very rich, from the TwitLonger that you wrote, everything that you're saying, trusting all these players, keeping it lean and mean, really putting the faith, put your money where your mouth is, really letting them know that, there is a trust there. You're touching base with them. Like Carpe's a couple floors above you. Just because you're playing a different game doesn't mean you can't come back and drop in a couple. You'll watch a scrim. If you wanted to come back to Overwatch, maybe there's a coaching position open all of a sudden. Seems like there is that open door, right?
Yeah, and I think it's also fair to say that just for those that maybe might not be following Valorant, Carpe, for how little time he has been there, it actually is doing phenomenally. I think from what I could gather, also from experts, he's basically like T1's best player at this point, or was in during the tournament. So yeah, that's also really nice to see. I always felt like Overwatch players that transition always seem to do very well. I think it's also down to their work ethic and that we filtered for that. So yeah, I had no doubt in my mind that Carpe, with given time, could get there, right? And I think there's still a lot of growth to be had there.
Yeah, he's a special. I mean, ever since even prior to the Overwatch League era, super special player, very talented. But in respect of your time, Roston, we don't want to go too terribly long. So as we kind of wrap up, I want to give like this last little bit to if you wanted to talk to any of the Infernal fans, obviously moving to Korea, there's been it's not not an easy decision to make. So if there's anything that you guys have coming down the pipeline that maybe you want to tease, or if you just have a message to any fans or maybe some future fans that you want to kind of let them know, I want to give this space to you. So take it away.
Okay, wait. But wait. I think I really obviously talked a little too much in my TwitLonger, so I think a lot of our real original fans have seen that. But for fans that haven't, I think our rebrand and our move here was like the opposite of how we initially wanted. I think we had told the league and we had agreed that our announcement of rebrand and move would be closer to the end of February, but then just like a week before Christmas, there's like, hey, sorry, we think it's gonna leak next week, so you should put out something. And then we're like, well, okay. So all we had time for is like a corporate press release which was very not very heartfelt. It's not what a lot of our fans deserves, and I really touched on that. And I really was very sorry for that, because our fans deserve a lot better. And then on top of that, like, we actually, before the Netties situation, we did want to come out swinging, and I think we did actually have a lot of names that may have been linked with us were because they were interested in coming here. We hadn't necessarily talked about money, so there was no like bag that was like fumbled. I think that's what I read, and then it really wasn't like that. It was more that they really wanted to come play for us, and the situation was that APAC was just in a really bad situation, and a lot of those top names, understandably, you want to get paid early, you want to secure and understand that you have a job at a salary you want. And I think our situation this year, wasn't necessarily ideal for the free agency, but I just know that for us as an org, like, we have really taken time and effort to find what was really best available and what works with our coaches and the existing players we had. And I think our I think all of us 100% believe that this year we will be stronger than last year. And last year we had many flashes of brilliance. We had a very deep run in the midseason, and I think we also, added another second place to our fantastic silver trophy collection last year in the first tournament. And I think for us, it's 100% improvement for all of us in the team, and I think we know that, and we will build on that. And I think if you liked what you saw last year, I'm sure you will like what you see this year. And I think that's something I really want our players and our fans to know. And if things work out, I think our potentials and our flexibility will really shine. And if our coaches do our job, then I think we really should be a team to be excited for this year out of APAC.
Well said. Well said. Yiska, as we kind of wrap up, anything coming down the pipeline for you?
No, I once again, I hope that we get to see a lot in terms of the content that is possible there. I'm kind of looking forward to, like, especially what MN3 is capable of, and Zest. I also really hope for the eventual arrival of Mag. Joe is familiar with the concept of the Scheinriese that I put forth like a couple of years ago, which is basically like someone looks gigantic in Contenders from far away, but as they get closer, like they shrink, and they're like, sometimes they are players. I don't know why it's Korean main tanks, but like for some reason that's true, that look great in Contenders, and then something goes awry during the transition to Overwatch League. It's maybe not even necessarily down to them. So I'm looking forward to that. And then also, I sense there's something in Skewed where it could be the Smurf effect, which I want to coin it like that, where someone sidesteps like, or gets out of the shadow of a great starter and just like performs on the breadth of their role. So I'm looking forward to that. I think that's really exciting about the roster. And yeah, thanks a lot for coming on.
Yes, thank you, Roston. This has been an incredible just opportunity to kind of have you come on and really pick your brain about obviously the future and a little bit of the past as well. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
Appreciate you.
No, thank you too so much for having me.
Yeah, no. All right, so that's been episode 286. If you like the show, like and subscribe, all that YouTube stuff, and download the podcast. That certainly helps as well. And we'll see you next week with possibly another guest. Nobody's really teased that they're doing a ton of signings, so we're gonna figure that out. So, 287 coming soon-ish. So, see ya.
Peace.